Well, now let me introduce a good friend of mine. He is our Terry Jeffery. He is, since 2007, Terry has been the editor-in-chief of CNS News. And actually, Terry, you've been on a number of our programs when we've done this because you just seem to be in the know, especially when it comes to the politics. And that's kind of what I want to talk with you about, the political implications of this decision, what was driving it, and what outcome could be, or what could be the outcome because of this decision on the political landscape?
Well, you know, I really don't know what was driving it. I do believe that the Obama administration had in mind from the moment they put this preventive services language into Obamacare,
right,
that they were going to do something like this, because when this was brought up in the Senate Finance Committee back during the markup,
right,
you had Senator Orrin Hatch, who was
right,
opposed to this, and they tried to get some language in, and Barbara Mikulski and some others opposed it.
Aggressively.
Right. So they left open the door for this. They didn't want to expressly put this in the legislation. They knew they'd lose some votes on it. So they were planning to do this all along, I think, Tony. I think politically now, really, it's a question of whether the Republicans in the House of Representatives are going to stand up and do the right thing. I know you talked about this legislation, which is good because, as you point out, it will protect not just religious institutions, but you and me, everybody, individuals, everybody. And if you look in the liberal press today, from, for example, the New York Times story this morning, the rhetoric coming out of the White House, they're trying to segregate religious institutions from regular Americans.
Well, that's what the administration is doing. The administration is trying to separate religious organizations among religious organizations,
right,
as we were just talking about.
Right.
So and it's interesting because it's not just the freedom of religion, it's the rights of conscience.
Exactly.
To not be forced to do something you're morally opposed to.
It's the most fundamental freedom of all. And I have to admit, I was a little worried when I saw House Speaker John Boehner's speech yesterday on the House floor, because he came out and he used this, he called it faith-based institutions. He talked nothing about individual freedom. I can tell you, I had a telephone conversation yesterday with Michael Steele, the spokesman, and we had a few emails back and forth. And this morning, the Speaker's office did send me a statement that his position is that this regulation should be rescinded in its entirety. The individual freedom of religion of individuals needs to be protected, as well as institutions. So that the House Speaker's on the right side of this at this point.
Yes, we met with him earlier this week, and I think the Republicans, I've seen them more unified on this issue than most. I do think that they're going to move something very soon. But I'm going to talk about the opposition to this mandate. I saw a Rasmussen poll, 63% of evangelicals, 65% of Catholics opposed to this. And it's not the substance of the mandate, it's the mandate.
Right. Well, you know I never expected to see anything like this happen in the United States of America in my lifetime. Such a bold strike at this fundamental freedom of conscience. I mean, the whole First Amendment basically revolves around the freedom of conscience. There's a free exercise of religion. The government can't establish religion. I believe the idea of free expression, freedom of the press, freedom to assemble, they're all the ability to make sure that our consciences are protected. Ultimately, about what more are we than a conscience? Right. And I never thought I'd see a President of the United States, a Secretary of Health and Human Services, who would so boldly, so clearly, so unambiguously go after this fundamental freedom, and quite frankly, try and force people to do what is evil. I mean, that's really when you get right down to it. You know, I'm a Catholic, and I believe in the Catholic teaching on contraception. I know that some Americans of religious faith don't. I think most of us agree that you cannot take the life of an unborn child. Some of these contraceptives they're talking about, as you mentioned earlier, do that.
Right.
So they're trying to force you and me and everybody watching this to be complicit in the taking of an innocent life. I appreciated what Richard Land said. We're not going to comply with this. Yeah. We're not going to agree to be forced to do this. I think that the administration, Tony, has underestimated the strength of convictions of Americans for standing up for their freedom in this way. And I think we're about to see, really, one of the most fierce and most important political battles in the history of our country, because of the consequences of losing this battle, which is losing this most fundamental freedom.
Well, Terry, you've been around quite a while, and when you say something like that, I take it serious. At CNS News, which is a division of the Media Research Center, you also are putting out a petition for people to sign on this issue. Where can they find out more about that petition?
Well, they can go to the website. I personally am not involved in that effort, but they can go to the website of the Media
the people
Research
that you know
right,
that are involved in that.
Go to the website of the MRC, and they can look that up and get involved in that.
Well, let me ask you this question. We're about out of time, but this, I have to believe, has implications for the elections even this fall.
Right. Well, you know, we all remember back in the last election, President Obama went out to my hometown of San Francisco, Tony, and talked about the bitter people clinging to guns and religion.
Yes.
In places like Pennsylvania and Ohio. Well, anybody who follows presidential politics over the last few decades knows that it's not the South or the West or the Northeast that decides American elections, maybe with the exception of Florida and the South. It is the Midwest. It's the northern Midwest. And I believe, especially the way that President Obama has excited the reaction of the Catholic bishops and the Catholic community in this country, and we know that Catholic voters in those states are important swing voters, that he's going to have a hard time persuading them to support him in November after he's attacked their beliefs and their church the way he has now.
30 seconds, is it going to impact the Republican field of candidates?
Well, personally, I think it is. I think that former Governor Romney, quite frankly, has some questions to answer about the way he conducted himself as governor in New York. Particularly, I've been asking his campaign the last few days to release a legal analysis done by his legal counsel, Mark Nilsson, when he was governor, that convinced him in the course of 48 hours to flip-flop from saying Catholic hospitals in Massachusetts did not have to administer abortion pills to saying that they did. I think Governor Romney needs to explain that, and until he does, I think people are going to have a lot of questions about where he stood on this exact type of issue when he was governor of Massachusetts.
Terry Jeffery, as always, appreciate your insights.
Thank you very much, Tim.
All right.